So, you want to be a VTuber, eh? Saw a fun streamer and decided to give it a go? Well, this is the video for you. I will be going over, from start to finish, what you need to make your very own rig, all in one video. In this video, we'll be going over everything step by step. Programs, art, rigging, physics, exporting, and importing into a VTuber program. So, buckle up. This is likely to be a very traumatic experience. First things first, you'll need Krita, Photoshop, or some other art program capable of exporting into the PSD file format. This is where we will draw our VTuber. Second, you will need Live2D. This has both a paid and free version. It really doesn't matter which one you pick, but if you have a more complex rig, you may end up needing the tools provided by the paid version. That being said, everything I show you in this video will be completely free. This is where we will be rigging our models and setting them exactly how we want, turning a 2D image into a pseudo 3D character. Third, you will need VTube Studio. Like Live2D, this has a paid and free version. All the paid version does in this case is remove a watermark. It really isn't that much of a bother, but pick whichever one you'd like. Assuming you are indeed drawing your own character, there are several important things that you will need to do in order to have a successful model. I'll go into the specifics in a moment, but for starters, always remember to think in layers. If there are two of something, you can bet that each one of them will inhabit a separate layer. Depending on the rig, you'll have between 30 to 100 layers, so get ready. If you intend to use the free version of Live2D, make sure that your canvas size is set to 2048 by 2048 pixels. Once you're on the canvas, start with drawing a base plate face for your character. Basically just the outline of their face followed by a monocolor fill for their skin tone. Keep your color and the line art for each body part in one layer. The eyes. When drawing the eyes, ensure that you separate everything into their own layers. Still keeping color and line art together, of course. That includes their iris, the shadow cast by the upper eyelid, the shine of the eye white, and the eyelashes. Note that you don't need to draw eyelids. If your character happens to have highly complex eyelashes, separate them into two parts, the individual eyelashes in one, and the large eyelash line on another. Next up is the mouth. This can be separated into a few parts. Teeth, if you have both a top and bottom row, separate them. Mouth background, upper lip, and lower lip. A tongue could be included in your mouth background, or you can add it to its own separate piece if you'd like. Give your lips some color that match the skin tone of your characters, so when rigging, you can hide the mouth background. Hair. This is something that may deviate depending on your own specific character, but I'll give some broad advice. Back of the hair, behind the head. Front hair, side hair pieces, and any little tufts of hair should be on their own layer. On the front of the hair, adding some shine can help give a more 3D effect. When drawing tufts of hair, a helpful tip is to make half line art, half no line art, and extend the color slightly out of the shape. This will allow you to place it on the rest of the hair without breaking up line art or the shape of the head. Ears. While these should each be on their own layer, they can all be in one piece. Still make a layer for each ear though. If you're making larger ears, such as cat ears, separate out the inner ear and the outer ear sections. The nose, depending on if you're drawing it small or large, can either be just one layer, or separated into bottom and upper nose layers. If you're drawing an anime nose, you should instead draw the line, the shine of the nose, and the shadow under the nose into independent layers. Eyebrows can of course just be one layer, one for each eyebrow. Moving on from the face is the body. I figured that most new people really aren't looking to construct the next HoloLive debut here, so I'm going to leave out most of the body and focus instead on the upper neck and torso. Make the neck its own layer, and any clothing its own layer. Stretch the neck slightly into the body and slightly into the head so that when moving it doesn't become disattached. If your character's got booba, do the flat colors on a separate layer from the shadowing. Freckles, scars, crowns, or any other accessories that happen to be on your character will also need their own layer. Shading. This is important. Shading must be on its own layer, and each shadow you have should have its own layer. Draw a shadow for each object you'd like, but again, make sure they're separated. That's essentially everything you'll need to draw, more or less, to have a floating, talking head and body. After finishing, if you're in Krita, go to File, Export, and then set the export type to PSD. Name it whatever you'd like. Part 4. Rigging. This is the hard part. So you've downloaded Live2D, opened it up and...
What the fuck was that?
Yeah, that's about right. It's a very daunting program, made more so by the fact that all of the documentation seems to have been translated by a man who's only heard of the concept of English. First things first, when opening up the program, click the X on the big pop-up. Then, start as free version to begin. Don't worry, I'll be moving through all the buttons, their functions, and how to use them. But first, let's import your model. To do this, it's as easy as dragging your newly drawn model onto the work screen. Once you've done this, we have to take a few steps to get things ready. 1. Take a second to look around the program. In the bottom left is your pieces list, also called the deformer panel. This is where all of your pieces that you've drawn can be found. 2. The work screen itself. This is where you'll be able to adjust pieces with the deformers that you make. 3. The parameters box. This box contains sliders that will eventually control all the movement of your VTuber. Now that we've determined some important pieces, let's make a mesh for everything. Control-click everything from your pieces list, and click the button at the top that says Auto. Then, in the drop-down menu, click Standard. And the program will automatically make a mesh of everything. Now go ahead and click the box that is a little outline of a person, edit Texture Atlas, and set the width and height to your file size, and click OK. The file size in this case will probably be 2048 by 2048. Once on the second screen, at the top click Automatic Layout, and set it to Automatic. Then turn the PX separation to whatever you want. Remember that the more pieces you have, the less room you've got. If you really can't get the automatic mover to fit everything, you can manually place items on the mesh as well. The orientation doesn't matter, but make sure nothing overlaps. That might mean shrinking some things down on the Texture Atlas to ensure it all fits. Now that you have a Texture Atlas and a mesh, I'll go over each button and what it does in the program. Starting at the top row, we have the Texture Atlas, the Manual Mesh Editor, which allows you to go into any piece and change how the polygons are arranged, or how many polygons there are per piece, and the Automatic Mesh Maker, which we just used. Moving over a row, we have the Warp Deformer. The Warp Deformer will allow you to bend and warp your pieces to make them look 3D. Next, we have the Rotation Deformer, which gives a point of rotation to objects. And the other Rotation Deformer, which, I'll be honest, I've tried to figure out why I'd ever use that one, but I actually just can't find a practical use for, so feel free to ignore it. After this, we have the Selector tool, which is how you'll actually edit deformers. The Lasso tool, which works just like any other lasso tool, works in any other program. Drag it around what you want to select and select them all at once. And the Brush Selection tool, similar to, any other brush selection tool, just kind of brush over what you want to select. But I would say this is another one of those buttons you can ignore. The next two buttons are at the top that are the Deform Path tool. This tool allows you to set a path in which you can bend meshes without warping them. And finally, we have the Glue and Art Path tools, which you can also ignore. Now that we've gone over each type of deformer and what they do, let's take a look at the inspector box. Click on any of your pieces from the deformer box on the left. You'll see a monumental amount of information show up in a box. That's the inspector. Although it looks like what some 90s action movie hacker would use to remotely activate some dude's full-action butt plug, it's actually quite simple, and I'll go over all of it now. The name is just the name of the piece taken from the layer name in Krita. You can change that as you'd like. The ID is the object's ID as seen in the Texture Atlas. The part is a rudimentary way to change draw order. Whatever you set it as will be which set of pieces are drawn over it. The deformer is determined when you select a deformer to use the piece. This is its parent deformer, and multiple pieces can be attached to one deformer. The clipping ID allows you to make it so that an object is only drawn when it is located on top of another select piece. For example, if you want to set it so that the iris can only be drawn when it is over the eye white, go to your eye white piece, copy the art ID, then paste it into the clipping ID of the iris. The invert mask button is useless. The draw order is the real man's way of setting layers, and it's quite simple. The higher the number, the higher the layer. This can be dynamic, and can change in real time when hooked to keyframes, which we'll talk about in a second. The opacity is the visibility. Lower opacity means more invisible. All the other buttons in this section can be ignored. They are advanced and I am too stupid to explain or use them, so you won't need them. Below the inspector panel is the parameter panel. This is where your animation will take place. You can either use the parameters provided to you or delete them and make your own. It's completely up to you. There are multiple buttons here, so let's carefully inspect each one of them. At the top of the panel, you can see in this order, add 3 keyframes, add 2 keyframes, delete all keyframes, manually adjust keyframe location, only show the parameters for the currently selected object, and a drop-down menu which contains...
It's a surprise tool that can help us later.
At the bottom of the panel, there's a new parameter button, which you can use to make a new parameter, obviously. Note that if you're using the free version, you can only have up to 30 parameters, which the program will be more than happy to tell you over and over and over again. I managed to make mine at only 15, so you should be fine, even with a complex rig. So yeah, you'll be fine. Next is a new folder button, which will allow you to make a folder in which you can place different parameters to keep organized. And finally, a delete parameter button, which will, delete the currently selected parameter. Moving into the actual work area, you can see at the top a few buttons. These are the only buttons you'll have to worry about in the work area. From left to right, it is this. The lock drawables object, which locks an art mesh from moving. The lock deformer button, which allows a deformer to be locked from moving. The show or hide drawables button, which will hide or show the currently selected object, which you can also do by clicking the little eye next to the piece in the deformer panel in the bottom left. And the show grid button, which can make it easier to line things up when deforming. Alright, we've made it through the buttons and we can finally begin actually editing. Let's do this. Start by hiding all objects except your body and face baseplate. Select your baseplate and click the Warp Deformer button. Then name it to whatever you want and click OK. Next, go to your Parameters panel. Select the Angle X parameter. And with the deformer you have just made, not the piece the deformer will deform, add 3 keyframes. Your middle keyframe will be your head in the middle, as it is in the original drawing. The leftmost keyframe will be where your head is on the left, and so on. Now go ahead and slide the slider to the left or rightmost keyframe and use the Warp Deformer, which you can reselect by clicking the little green box above your piece in the Deformer panel, to deform it into the shape that looks something like it's looking in the direction you want. This is where you're going to need a little bit of messing around. Just keep working with it until you have something you want. Once you have it there, keep the base plate in keyform, click the drop-down menu in the Parameters panel, and click Reflect Motion to reflect it horizontally. Now go ahead and do that same thing for the up and down movement, except when you reflect vertically. Keep in mind that while the Reflect tool is useful, it's not actually perfect, and you may have to do some pieces manually if they don't reflect right. Mess around a little and you'll get it. Once you have the left and right and up and down of the head complete, you're going to have to do that for each eye, nose, hair, and mouth, and any other misc pieces like crowns or, piercings. Each time, make a new deformer and add 3 keyframes to the X and Y axis. Ensure that you have an individual deformer for each piece, not just one for both eyes. Editor's note. So after making the video, I realized I forgot to say something. For the irises, and this is very important, it drove me insane. You have to hook the irises up to something called eyeball X and eyeball Y. They're in the parameters list by default. You cannot do just angle X and angle Y. So make sure you do that, because the first time I did it, I forgot to do that. That being said, specifically for the irises, you're going to want one deformer for both irises. This is very specific to the irises, but it is very important, so make sure to do that. Make sure to add keyframes for every single piece that will be moving. I have multiple times while using this thing deformed the whole thing into the position I wanted it, realized I forgot to add a keyframe, then had to undeform it and restart again. If a piece slides oddly or you need more control, make a new keyframe by clicking the green circle on the side of the parameter. This will give you a new anchor point that your object will move to before moving to its final destination. This can, remove things like sliding on the face if you're, looking to the side and the eyes look like they're sliding on the face rather than moving with the face. You'll know what I mean if it ends up happening to you. The good news is that once you've done one eye, one ear, eyebrow, etc., you can do the other very easily as long as they're identical. Simply control-click the deformer plus the piece you want to mirror in the deformer panel, copy and paste them, remove the weird rotation deformer it creates, then right-click them in the editor panel and click Reflect. Select Reflect on the x-axis, click OK, and awesome. Awesome! You've taken the time to create both an X and Y axis of movement for everything related to the head. Nice work. Unfortunately, you're not done yet. On the side of the parameter, you can see an oval shape. Clicking that will combine the two parameters next to each other into a larger box. If you move the sliders around to each corner, you'll see your pieces sliding back to their default position. Control-click literally every single deformer that you've attached to the X and Y parameters. Then go to the drop-down menu in the Parameters panel and click Synthesize Corners, and the program will try to generate corners to the square, allowing you to move up diagonally and down diagonally in each direction. This has limited levels of success, and you'll almost certainly have to tweak many pieces to ensure they look right. The good news is that you're through one of the most time-consuming pieces of this entire endeavor. Now, we'll quickly discuss the Z-axis. The Z-axis is head tilt. Simply select all deformers you've attached to the head one more time, then click the Rotation Deformer button. Control-click the center of the circle that it creates, and drag it to the base of the neck. Then make 3 keyframes in the Z-axis, or in this case it would be called the axis Z, or angle Z, parameter, and tilt it to each side for, each extreme keyframe. Before we move on, remember that anything can be set to a keyframe, opacity, draw order, the mesh of the object itself, etc. What this means is that you can attach, say, ear movement to blinking by simply using keyframes and a rotation deformer to move the ears down each time you blink. This opens up a lot of options, so, play around with it. I can give you the basics, but as for learning what you specifically want to do, you'll have to figure that out for yourself. Speaking of blinking, let's move on to animating the eyes and the mouth. Starting with the eyes, select your eye white and copy its mesh ID. Then paste that into the iris's clipping ID. Now select the eyelashes and use the Deform Path Edit button to make a string of deformers tracing along the eyelash. Now go to the IL or IR parameter, depending on which of the eyes you've selected, and create 2 keyframes. The left keyframe will be the fully closed eye, and the right will be the fully open eye. Now go to the left keyframe and simply use the deformer path to bend the eyelash into a closed position. And then make a warp deformer for the eye white and add 2 more keyframes to the correct parameter. Now warp the eye white to match it up with the closed eye. You'll likely need to make multiple keyframes to ensure the eye white moves in time with the eyelashes. Once you're done, simply do this to the other eye and you're finished. You can also use the Reflect Parameters button, but beware that if you use it wrong, you'll reflect the XY movement as well, which won't look right on your rig. The mouth, like the head, has 2 parameters: mouth shape and mouth open. Mouth shape determines smiling versus frown, with the middle being neutral. And the mouth open determines how open the mouth is, as the name suggests. Like the eye, I recommend using the deform path on the lips to move the mouth up and down. Warp it into the shape you'd like using the methods you've learned thus far. Interlinking the two can use to make an O shape versus a smiling versus a frown, for how your mouth looks when you're using it in real time. There are tons of other parameters that you can change and modify. It's up to you which ones you do. The ones I've outlined are merely the essentials. You're almost done, almost there. The last step is setting up physics. For any hair or accessories that you want to sway when you move, create a deform path edit skeleton on each, like you see here. Then make or go to a parameter named your objects plus move side. Set 3 keyframes to the deform path. Then, for each extreme left plus right keyframe, move the deformer to the side or up or down, or however you want them to deform when you're moving. The last thing we're going to do is set up the physics engine. In Live2D, go up to the modeling button at the top, click the last thing on the drop-down menu, open physics /scene blending settings, and now we're in the physics engine. This is where you'll ready the actual parameters for the next step so it can track your face. Under the orange physics button, click on the add and then name it. Set the input preset to head input and set the physics model preset to whatever you'd like. Now then, don't get overwhelmed. While I'm not going to bother walking you through every button here, I will walk you through how to set it up and what you need to set up. Above the white box under input, click add and add everything relating to your head except for your object plus move side parameters, the things that you want to sway. The ones that we set up for physics. Where it says pendulum settings, click add. This will add a weight for your model to move off of. Now then, when you click on the white display box where your model is, it should follow your cursor. If it doesn't, try adding and removing various head-related parameters. If removing one of them makes your head move, then you may have forgotten to set up keyframes for it. Now go to the output button under physics. This is where you're going to add the parameters that you made for swinging hair or accessories. Finally, move the head around to see if you like how the objects shake. If you don't, edit the pendulum number settings. Durability will change how stiff the shaking is. Shaking intensity will determine how many times it shakes before stopping. Reaction will determine how reactive it is to slight movements, and overall will determine all of those things in one number. It's done. It's finally done. You've successfully finished rigging your Vtuber model. Give yourself a pat on the back. I'm sure it was a long process. Now it's time for the final and easiest step, setting it up for use. Go ahead and make a folder on your desktop called yourVtuber_VTS. X out of the physics engine and go to File, Export to Runtime, MOC3 file, then export it to the folder that you've just made. You should have a bunch of files in there now. Part 5. Setting up for use. Now it's time to open Vtuber Studio. Once open, click the pink outline at the top and click Import Your Own Model on the bottom left. Now drag the folder you made earlier into this new location it just opened. Restart Vtuber Studio and then click on the model that was added. Huzzah! You now have a model, but it's not moving. For that, we need to go into Settings. Double tap the screen and click the cog icon. Then, at the top, click the camera icon. Now go ahead and click Choose Camera. Select your webcam and click Camera On. And now your model should be moving with your face. Now, if you made your own parameters in Live2D and didn't work with the pre-made ones, some parts of your model may not be moving right away. This is fine and to be expected. At the top, click the person with the cog next to them and next to the camera icon, and scroll through the settings. They should be labeled very clearly. Ones in red mean that they were not able to be located right away by Vtuber Studio. Click the input button next to the red text, and click the correct parameter from your Live2D session. This should fix any issues. And fantastic, you've done it. You now have a Vtuber that tracks your face. Now it's time to get it to actually appear on stream or YouTube. This next part of the video will be using OBS. Part 6. Showtime. In Vtuber Studio, click the green button and select Background 8. This will make the background become a green screen. Now minimize Vtuber Studio and launch OBS. If you're not sure how to use OBS, check the tutorial link below for a great intro to the program. I won't be explaining it here. Now then, add a window source and select Vtuber Studio. Then right-click on the newly created source and click Filters. Finally, right-click the blank black-gray box, click Add, and add a chroma key. It should automatically be set to the right color. If you have any green on your character, you can change the background to the color picker item in Vtuber Studio, and choose a color that your character doesn't have. If your character is some insane rainbow, in OBS you can decrease the chroma color as to remove the background without removing anything else on your character, unless your character has the same color as the background. And there you have it. From start to finish, a Vtuber of your very own. If you like this video, be sure to...
Like that's ever gonna happen. What a load of...